All right, so that is the end of the formal part. We have time for questions. You can have, okay. So if we could have the speakers come and sit up front. We are running a little bit late, but we have at least 15 minutes. We can do 30 minutes? Okay, so do you guys want to come and sit up here? And do we have a portable mic? Okay. I'm going to give one to the speakers and one to the audience. And if, I guess I can point to people, and if you have a question, if you could identify yourself and your organization, that would help us. Oh, we have one, great.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. My name is Victoria Doyon. I'm with George Mason University. I'm wondering if you could speak to what we understand about the function, the role of the lakes with respect to preservation of the glaciers. What history do we have in understanding, recognizing the risk to human life? It strikes me as somewhat intuitive that the water also serves somewhat of a function.
Before. It is naturally occurring because on the rock glacier you have a lot of this chalcopyrite, so fool's gold. And so there's sulfur likes to substitute for iron. And these blue ponds can actually reach 16 degrees Celsius during the summer. That was really surprising. The ice ponds, maybe 2 degrees. I know because I fell in.
Yeah, one other point too is it's a little bit of a positive feedback mechanism as well, because as the water in the lakes increase, it absorbs more of the longer wavelengths, and so it sort of heats up the lake and then eats back at the calving face of the glacier kind of thing. So, it's challenging. It's difficult.
And I guess one historical note, just for fun, when I was showing the photographs of the early climber scientists, Fritz Muller, an Austrian glaciologist, or Erwin Schneider, the cartographer, all the people whose photographs you see, when they were there taking those photographs in the early 1950s, their greatest fear was the return of a little ice age. Okay? I mean, they were scared to death that that was going to happen next. And once again, glaciers would destroy villages, and they would destroy infrastructure and kill people. So it's ironic that the exact opposite happened, and it caught everyone by surprise, but that's what's happening, and it's a learning process. We're learning how to deal with it now through these climber scientist grants and the USAID projects.
I would like to add also, sometimes the big question is, why are you draining the lakes if in this time what we need the most is water? Yes, that question has been done many times. Lakes play a very important role in the life of the people in the mountainous areas, evidently. And we also found that to store water in the lakes is very cheap against the dams, the traditional dams in the flat places. What we found in Peru is to store water when we store water in the lakes, the cost per cubic meters is between 3 to 10 cents of dollar each cubic meter. While in the flat places, when you build a dam and build the basin for the storage, the cost of each cubic meter is between $1 to $2 per cubic meter. So it's important to work, but in the lakes, in the mountainous areas, mainly in the glacier basins with glaciers, the watersheds with glaciers. It's very important. You can store water very cheap, but at the same time, it's important to define which lake you can use and which not, because they represent a high risk for the populations. if in the critical situation, when all the glaciers disappear, as it is going to happen in the near future, perhaps 2 or 3 decades more, mainly in the tropical glaciers, then we have to store water in all the lakes. They will become safer in that time because no glaciers. Glaciers have gone. And we have to store water, the rain, the precipitation water in those lakes.
Okay, other questions? Doug?
My name is Doug Poole. I'm from Agility. This is a question for Cesar and for Alton. Certainly enjoyed your presentation today and also yesterday. One question I had is that there was a catastrophic event in 1971 in Peru with the Yungay earthquake. How did this affect those glacier lakes? You did mention that yesterday or today.
Yes, the phenomenon in 1970, after the earthquake, almost 10 or 15 minutes after the earthquake, was an ice avalanche, but it didn't touch a lake. It was only ice avalanche coming from 6,000 meters above sea level to Yungay, over Yungay that was 2,300 meters. Then a difference of level of 4,000 meters. The friction between the ice and the soil produces a jelly flow, not a very fluent flow. That was the result in 1970. But in other cases, when a glacier or rock falls into the lake, then the lake overtops the dam, and it could produce a gulf and a disaster, as it happened many times.
I actually, sorry, here from the back, from online, I want to jump in here in this moment. Dane McKinney, who's the co-manager of HIMAP at University of Texas at Austin, wanted to share a comment from the last question. She says, the ponds that form on the, the ponds that form on the surfaces of the end of the glaciers act as heat sinks and increase the glacier melting. So draining off the early meltwater could decrease the glacier recession to some degree.
Yeah, I'm Jed Schilling. And there were a couple of brief mentions of hydropower, and you just talked a little bit about managing water for the farms downstream. But with the LASA projects and other things like that, is there an increasing attention to these cross-sector factors and making sure that with the drains and tubes put in, you're getting as much hydropower as you can, which is very important in these regions, and that the water flow, to the extent possible, is being managed to help the farmers downstream. And this will have to become more and more managed over time because, as you say, water is very important, and dependence on the glaciers is going to change to dependence on managing the rainfall and water flow. So is that taking a larger role in your planning and projects now?
Yes, that's the truth. What we are trying to do right now is, besides the risk reduction, is to work on the integrated water resources management. And that's a big social work. Has to be done. Our water resources law was was written in 2008. And we have to work in the integrated water resources. Otherwise, we'll have big problems in the future, as in this morning and also in the other talks was said that the peace building is in the middle. We need peace for the development. And most of the environmental problems are related to water. And the solution in the mountainous areas is to store water in the lakes. Nature gave us the place. So we have only to put the regulatory systems. I mean, gates, valves, small tunnels, but they are very cheap.
And Jed, on a related matter, something I haven't had the chance to mention yet, but as you well know, recently there's been tremendous resurrection of interest in developing hydropower in Nepal. Another reason I think that Cesar's work and Dane McKinney's and the HIMAP and Jeff Cargill's work is so important is that many of these have glacier lakes above them, okay? And that needs to be factored in. Otherwise, you're going to spend $700 million on a hydro facility and then lose it, as has happened before in the Mount Everest area.
Maybe if I could just add one thing to that. I think in my understanding, and Nepal, Alton knows Nepal much better, but the dams that have traditionally been in Nepal have been run-of-river, and so they generate a bit of power, but the water flows downstream. But as you're getting these changes in the actual systems, I think there's going to be more talk about storage, because at some point there's issues with storage dams, and we all know that that's going to be complicated, but that's probably something that people are going to be looking at more and more to actually hold on to some of the waters.
I'm Rose Schneider, Health Systems Management. There's an awful lot of talk about the science of the mountains and geology and all of that. The other side of it, where you were working with communities and really getting into the sociology of communities, what kind of expertise, what kind of experts did you use to help pull out the real in-depth understanding of the communities? Were they anthropologists? Were they social scientists? Were they physicians and nurses?
Yeah, primarily social scientists and TMI staff. In Nepal, we actually hired a consultant who used to be a Mountain Institute staff, a social scientist with a PhD from New Zealand, and he did a fabulous job of facilitating the LAPAs, developing new methods for the LAPAs, pulling out this information, and also a great job in helping us with the lessons learned document. His name was Shailendra Takali. In Peru, we had staff, Laura Trejo and Jorge Richarte, who's an anthropologist, PhD from Cornell. They worked together with the local stakeholder groups. And remember, that was two groups, the campesinos and the urban groups, and both presented challenges. They were different in terms of how do you get people to meet, who are the leaders in the village, that sort of thing. But we had some very wonderful resources to work with.
One quick question. There's a lot of si Dios quiere, if God wishes it. Was there any fatalism that affected how people felt about their future being drowned?
No, I don't think there's fatalism. There's fatalism if you go in and don't communicate with people. And if you, for example, one example on another glacier lake in Nepal, Soropa, back 15 years ago, was drained 3 meters. But the recommended depth to drain it was 20 meters, okay? But they ran out of money. So they ended up putting in an early warning system, but without consulting the local people. So I've read articles of interviews with the local people who express a high degree of fear and fatalism for when is that lake going to burst. So I think, as Cesar mentioned, it's just critical to, from the very beginning, involve local people.
I would like to add also that besides the work that I made, because now there are only a few lakes that are very dangerous, but there are still, I am involved in work in efficient water use, of course, with local communities. And what I found is the first thing that we have to find is the confidence. Otherwise, you cannot develop any project. Now I am putting pipes instead of channels to avoid the losses by infiltration, by evaporation, and the people are working very well. They gave me lessons how to work in very high mountains, carrying big pipes, 40 kilograms each, and more than 3,000 meters above sea level, men and women working there, but the most important is to have confidence with them. then they know that that you are working for them for good, not trying to make business, because they understand very well the situation. And that's what I found, and I could add for your question.
And if I can add just one more comment that connects Jed's question with Rose's, one of the places where there has been a conflict between farmers and the hydropower industry is, which lake is it? Paron? Paron, which has been managed by Duke Energy. For hydropower, they were running the release gates at too high a rate, and it was damaging farmers' fields. And the farmers ended up taking over the control room for about 8 years. Some number of years. And then one of the climber scientist grants was to a social scientist, a geographer from UC Santa Cruz. Thank you. I'm hearing Glenn's voice, but I'm not seeing him. Okay. Okay. And so Adam French has been helping to negotiate between the energy company and the community, who had not been talking well with each other because of this mistrust that Cesar speaks of. So that was an area where, beyond the immediate core team, some of our grantees, there's a mix of physical scientists like Liana and social scientists. Brian? Oh, yeah.
And Cesar, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is there's another glacial lake forming above Lake Paron.
Excuse me?
There's another lake forming above, there's a
Yes,
glacial lake
yes,
forming above
yes,
Lake Paron.
yes,
And
that's
so,
the truth.
so one of the issues is that I think they're far enough apart, but you may have a glacial lake outburst problem above Paron that could do serious damage.
That's the truth, yeah. The paper that Mercury from Santa Cruz wrote some years ago shows how a work that we did with the best goodwill. We made a work, you saw that we drilled a long tunnel with a lot of risk. We connected the tunnel 60 meters below the surface, and we gave the work in a very good condition in 1992. After 16 years, this company uses the water only for energy production, without consulting for farmers and nobody. They didn't consult. Then the community get mad, and they took all the installations in the lake until now. It happened in 2008, and until now, 7 years without any solution. And one real bad thing was that this company that made millions of dollars using that water used to give to the population toys, cakes, dolls, and balls during Christmas. That was the social responsibility of those people. Look at what big companies do at the mountainous areas.
Right.
Thank you. Brian Greenberg, Interaction. I wanted to appreciate all the presentations, really interesting. The question I have for you is really around the success that you've had as a discipline in calling attention to the risk posed by GLOS. And in light of the fact that there are, that the risks expand in all directions from the disappearance of glaciers, and it will affect agriculture and water supplies, hydropower. There are many other areas that are potentially affected directly, and in ways not in any sense to diminish the importance and the tragedy and the impacts of this kind of glacial lake outburst. But what we're looking at, especially with accelerating disappearance of the glaciers, especially in places like Peru and across South Asia that are directly dependent on the water storage provided by glaciers in the Himalayas. They're rapidly disappearing. You guys have done a great job in capturing public imagination and attention, or maybe you feel you toil in obscurity, but compared to the way water issues and climate change and come together in many other areas, one doesn't sense equivalent urgency. There is around these dramatic catastrophes, but the slow onset kinds of problems that we face don't seem to have captured the imagination of the public or policymakers. So I'm wondering if you guys have any insights for the rest of us who are concerned about the whole suite of impacts that we're looking at from changing climates and from glaciers to monsoon rainfall, and how we would use your kind of PR savvy to expand the sense of policy area and urgency around these issues.
That's a tough one there, and you know, it's kind of the holy grail. I guess you just want total awareness by everybody. Now, I think for the story I did on the SETI disaster, that gets people's attention. And you made that point clearly. It does. It's not the slow march towards, you know, changes that most of the time we're witnessing with climate change and effects on glaciers and water catchment systems. It's the, you know, it's these tragic events. And one thing I thought about is that is a time to try to make changes too. It's a very sad thing. It's certainly not the model to go on. It's absolutely not. So it is a challenge to think of ways to captivate people. And I've never been considered a good PR person, I guess, as a scientist to you know, beat the drum on that.
That's not a fair term to use, but whatever would the dissemination, the awareness raising, just wondering how we go about that, how we go about taking the same insights that you all have developed here and broadening them out.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, just in the case of Nepal, you know, on this project, as well as a Surveyor project, I'm on a USAID project, you know, we work with other Nepali organizations and we do capacity building. We teach the teachers and we teach the students and we go to the communities. So, you know, that's, it may be a small drop, but it's really, I think, the way to go, the way to proceed with this is work with people that can affect change, work from the ground up, and you know, share and teach as much as we can on every single level. You know, that's what I do anyway, and I don't have any solution for, I guess, expanding that message further. It's a great question.
This might be a simplistic way, but what I found has been successful is telling a story. The visual impact is so much more powerful, showing those videos versus showing data, squiggles. Tell a story related to a family member. How many people here have lost people from cancer? Climate change is a cancer on the planet. I think the way you really make people care about it is to relate it back to something and someone that they've loved and lost.
This might be a partial answer to your question, but I think one of the reasons we've been as effective as we have in glacial lakes and management and control and et cetera is that we can quantify the damage, okay? Now, if you remember the list of other vulnerabilities and priorities from Nepal, it includes things like landslide. There's an increase in landslides. There's an increase in floods, increase in forest fires, but we can't quantify them. That's our next step, okay? We know people feel that because of changing precipitation patterns, there are more landslides now than there used to be, and they're deadly. They're really deadly. So our next step would be to start monitoring and get the data we need to quantify that as a real impact. And that might be part of what you could do as well, you know, in your climate change concerns.
All right, we are, well, we're running out of time. I want to give Cesar a word and then give Andrew the last word.
Yes, I would like to say also that we did not realize yet the meaning of the climate change. I think so. Because I am just finishing reading that book that says the Little Ice Age. What does Little Ice Age mean for Europe and also for North America between the 14th century to the 19th century? Not only famine, not only hunger, but also revolution. The French Revolution was accelerated by the Little Ice Age. There wasn't wheat, there wasn't wine, there wasn't corn, there wasn't any food for the people, and hundreds of millions died in Europe in that time, in those 500 years. The same is going to occur now, but with the opposite phenomenon. It's warming. All the glaciers are going to disappear. For instance, it's said that in 2030 is going to start the big water crisis. Are we prepared for that? Are our politicians concerned about that? Do they know that? I think they don't know. And most of us also. Then the big problem is coming. The scientists already said that warming is going to last at least 100 years more. Also, if we stop the CO2 emissions. So the problem is starting. It started perhaps since the 70s, but it's going to last a lot of years. And really, your question, I think, is very good, and we have to make that question to the politicians, mainly to the decision makers.
Andrew, final word?
Actually, I've got a sort of maybe I suppose it could be a final word, but I have a question as well. We'll see if there's time. But you know, this last series of comments, questions, and so on, I think has been very interesting, and it gets very much to the heart of some of the issues that we grapple with. I'm Andrew Tabor. I'm the executive director of the Mountain Institute. And you know, I'd almost wish there was a whole other session that we could have immediately after this one. Alton wears other hats, which he has a very good understanding of ecological restoration and mountain ecosystems and so on. And as these glaciers retreat, there's going to be major issues in terms of water supply that are coming. And we have some very interesting beginnings of solutions in high mountain systems in terms of ecosystem-based adaptation and a whole range of other things that are possible in terms of solving some of the problems. But I think you've also raised another issue. I think in terms of glacial lake outburst floods, we've been able to draw attention to mountains around this one topic, but there's many other topics that are highly relevant to mountain sustainable development and climate change. And to me, it's very sad to see that this is really the kind of the main thing we've been able to draw attention to, and there's so many other things going on. I've been involved in trying to influence sustainable development goals, and it's been a real uphill battle. I used to work on tropical forests in the past, and man, there's a zillion organizations, there's tons of money, there's REDD, there's all kinds of solutions that are driving it. You come to mountains, which have more people are vulnerable and food insecure living in mountains than all the people live in tropical rainforests. Yet we don't get 1/10 of the attention. We don't get 1/10 of the research. So there's lots and lots of issues. And so I'll start frothing at the mouth. I'll leave it at that. But so I'm very grateful for your comments because I think it does raise a whole other set of cans of worms that are highly relevant to mountains. But I did have a question which I would really very much like to get the panel's perceptions on, which is, I guess, Cesar, correct me if I'm wrong, but the sense I have from Peru is that at the government level and the community level, there is a reasonable capacity to begin addressing the immediate problems with GLOFs. Who knows what 20 years from now the situation is going to look like. If that's true, it'd be interesting to know. I mean, you mentioned there's a couple other dangerous lakes. Maybe there's many. When you turn to Nepal, I'm sort of very anxious. I mean, you've mentioned, gosh, you'd like to get out and do a rapid surveys of the 20 most dangerous, but what's your sense of the immediate scale of problems, Alton? Are there 100 scary lakes out there? What's it look like now? What's it going to look like in 20 years? And what's the national capacity to deal with it? So, Cesar, what do you think of capacity now and the scale of the problem? Alton, what do you think of the scale of the problem now and in the future and capacity to deal with it?
And could I just note that I'm getting the red light from Deborah, so if you could answer very quickly and maybe take it offline. And I apologize to everyone that we've run out of time. Go ahead.
Well, really, in this time, since the 90s, the government capacity, the politician capacity to support has been reduced a lot because the privatization of some companies in Peru. That's the big problem. Our office that was always in charge of all the responsibility of the studies, the projects, and the work in the Danger Lake, now that office cannot do nothing because the new institution says, no, we only give the rules, but we cannot do the work, neither the project. So the capacity has been reduced, unfortunately. But also, we should know that the number of dangerous lakes are less than before. There are perhaps 10 to 15 lakes that are dangerous, but no more, because all the glaciers now are in very steep slopes. Then no big lakes can grow in steep slopes. But in the past, I mean more than 50 years ago, the glaciers were in flat places, so the lakes were also in flat places, huge lakes. But now it's different. We need to push our government, to push our politicians to do something more to support this kind of work. Mainly thinking in the new generations. The problem about water, the concern about water will be big in the next decades.
Very quick.
Short answer?
Yeah.
Okay. The official list of dangerous glacial lakes in Nepal is now 20. We happen to think that they're probably it's somewhat less than that because this is based on remote sensing, and as Greg said and Uliana said, you just can't base it entirely on that. You need the field verification as well. What's standing in the way of assessing those lakes and the ways that it is needed is resources. Okay, well, capacity is pretty much there in Nepal, but with the proper resources, we could assess all 20 of those lakes within 3 years and then build the capacity of the Department of Hydrology to monitor lakes in perpetuity, which are forming now as we speak, as Uliana showed us. The Ongozomba is a glacial lake of the future that's going to be dangerous. So, we've come back to this theme about 50 times in the last 2 days. It's resources. With the proper resources, we can address and solve these problems, but that's the challenge.
Thank you very much. Remember, tomorrow morning we are moving this little road show to the Carnegie Endowment. Thank you. And we start up at 9 o'clock. I hope to see most or all of you there. I hope to see all of you. I realize I may not. I will be there, and I hope that all of you will. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Jed, and the Cosmos Club for allowing us to hold this here. And thanks to the panelists for a great discussion.